Good morning. Welcome everyone to the meeting of the Barrie Police Service Board for June 18th, 2026. I'd like to call the meeting to order and begin with our land acknowledgement. In keeping with Indigenous protocol and building respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada, it is customary to acknowledge the traditional territories and ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples. We would like to acknowledge this sacred land on which the Barrie Simcoe Emergency Service Campus operates. It has been a site for human activity for 15,000 years. This land is the ancestral land of the Wendat and the Anishinaabe Nation. The treaty that was signed for this particular parcel of land is collectively referred to as the Williams Treaty. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture. We also recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect. Language, thank you. Before I move on with this morning's agenda, I'd like to hand it over to Chief Johnston to provide the services comments on the recent tragedies we've seen here in the province. Chief Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the death of two sworn police officers in our province. Toronto Police Officer Mark Pinizzato, Provincial Constable Taryn Barrie, two officers who chose to live their life in service to their community and paid the ultimate sacrifice. Chair, as you're aware, we have members attending Constable Barrie's funeral today. On behalf of the Barrie Police Service, I want to extend our condolences to Constable Barrie's and Constable Pinizzato's family and friends. Today, our thoughts are with everyone who has been impacted by these tragic losses. Policing in this country, this province, is built on a shared commitment to serving and protecting our communities. The loss of an officer is felt not only within their own service, but across the entire policing community. We stand in solidarity with our Toronto Police Service and Ontario Provincial Police partners as they gather today to honor Constable Barrie's life and service, and this coming Wednesday to honor Constable Pinizzato's. I would ask that we take a moment to reflect on their sacrifice and to keep their loved ones and colleagues in our thoughts during this difficult time. Chair, thank you. We remember and honor these officers as heroes in life.
Thanks, Chief. The board extends its condolences and gratitude and appreciation for the officers as well. A motion to approve today's agenda. Mayor Nuttall, Mr. Khan, any comments, amendments, et cetera, required to the agenda? Seeing none, those in favor? Thank you. Any declarations of conflict of interest with respect to agenda items from members this morning? Seeing none, motion to approve our minutes of May the 21st. Mr. Khan? Mayor Nuttall? There is one amendment to the minutes that were distributed. The date should be May the 21st rather than the 19th. With that amendment, a motion to approve. Thank you. As those who were present last month, we had a presentation on our downtown initiative. And as a result of that, we've received a request for deputation. That deputation has been granted. So I'd like to introduce to the board Dr. Josh Fletcher. Are you going to go out? Dr. Fletcher, can you defer yours for a few minutes when we go on a couple other items on the agenda? Wait for the Mayor Nuttall. Thank you. So I'll go on with our first presentation then, please, Chief Johnston, on our triangle statistics.
Thank you, Chair. Again, the board's well familiar with our organizational researcher, Madison Sharman, and to bring us up to speed where our efforts are and giving a lay of the land, as you can imagine, of our growing city and the issues we face.
Amazing. Okay, so we'll get started with our triennial stat update. Like the chief said, my name is Madison. I work as an organizational researcher, and I'm just here to give an update on some of the stats in terms of our volume, our crime counts, and our harm citywide and downtown. So this covers the time period of January to May. Usually we do January to April, but we've been delayed a little bit. So we're presenting up until the end of May, our data. I do want to remind everybody about the boundary expansion. We're not seeing a significant impact to our stats by any means, but this has grown our area that we are counting. So I just wanted to remind everybody that that is the new boundary that we are both mapping and counting stats within. When it comes to our data sources, we look at CAD created events. So that is the volume that comes into our police service through our communications. It does not include online reports. And from there, we see our crime counts or more of our just social disorder pieces. From our crime counts, we then apply the Canadian Severity Harm Index to get our weighted harm. So it just allows the more measures you have, the better picture, the more holistic piece. So when looking at our volume, it's been a little bit higher these past couple months than we've seen in previous years. Police attended about 55% of these calls, and the others were triaged by our communications unit. So again, this is just indicative of volume that's coming into the police service. I will say we removed 911 hangouts, which are taking up about 17% of our CAD volume. So that's not necessarily going to the front line. We respond to less than 1% of those after our investigator or our communications does investigations to see if that's warranted. But it's a huge volume that our communicators upstairs have to go through. When we look at our top volume, when it comes to our front line, we see community service remaining our highest, which is really exciting because that's showing our level of proactivity within the community. So community service can be frontline officers booking up on hotspot checks or doing proactive patrols. It could also be our special constables as well in our Guardian program. So there's a high level of proactivity happening within our service. After that, we see police assistance, traffic, unwanted person, motor vehicle accident, which is also traffic related, traffic stop, police information, ambulance assist, traffic complaint, and intimate partner violence. So as you see, most of these up here are social disorder in nature or proactive in nature, but then we do have criminal instances as well. When we look at our officer generated calls for service, again, just highlighting that high level of proactivity, right? So with the shift to evidence-based policing over the last couple of years, we're really seeing that come out in our stats and how that's operationalized. So seeing 30% of our calls for service are generated by an officer rather than coming in, for example, the 911 call and our officers being dispatched out. Again, a huge contributor to that is our special constable program, our guardians, all of those pieces that are in. When we look at priority, we see about 20% of our calls for service are considered emergency, so priority 0 or 1. Again, we're seeing the composition of our responses change with the increase in proactivity, which would be in priority 4. This remains consistent as well when we look at our events that are criminal versus non-criminal. So the police deal with a lot of instances that are non-criminal in nature, and we do have calls that can be non-criminal in emergency, such as like a missing child and those kinds of pieces where we are, of course, involved. But we also see from the graph a couple of pieces before the level of social disorder that police often have to work with, and then the 11% being criminal in nature. So over the past 150-ish days that this report covers, Barrie police officers laid over 3,000 charges against over 1,000 individuals. Our most common charges, which you'll see here, are breach related, and that also comes out of research and our knowing of concentration. So a small amount of people contribute to the most amount of harm or charges. So you are seeing repeats, which means with the criminal offense, will be tagged on likely a breach charge. So that's why those are quite consistent and quite high. And then moving into our harm data. So again, we apply a weighted harm index to our data, understanding that not every crime is equally experienced or equally punished, right? So looking at more severe offenses, and we can think of this as the weight being days in prison. So If you go to prison and you are indicted for the offense, it would be a score of over 8,000, as opposed to something like disturb the peace or fail to appear, which would be 11 or 12 days. So when we look at our proactive, commercial and community reported, research talks about then dividing harm up further. It just gets rid of some of the noise that can happen when you aggregate the stats, as well as lets us know a little bit more precisely when we map or look at people and places. So our community reported harm remains the highest. That's also because the highest harm things occur in that category. So again, this breakup has remained relatively consistent. When we look at our total harm year over year, we are seeing total harm is lower this year than previous. And importantly, the blue box there, the community reported harm, that's often with person victims, that is also low. But we are seeing a jump in commercial crime. So as I mentioned, community reported harm is staying relatively low compared to the past couple of years. What that mainly consists of is fraud being our driver, that's remained consistent. Break and enter, robbery, sex assault, and for the first time, second degree murder. But I will note when we look at counts, that is one event. So again, with a very safe city, when you apply a harm index, these severe incidents are really going to fluctuate and jump to the top of the water while the others sink, right? So I see the second degree murder here in the harm, but it's less than 1% of the proportion of criminal count. When we look at our proactive drivers, our biggest pieces are always possession of weapons and breach of probation. So proactive harm being the good things that our officers find due to their proactive efforts, right? So we are seeing this a little bit lower. That can be explained by a lot of the proactive projects we're running right now, whether it be the Guardians, whether it be traffic related or social disorder related. The results of those proactivities aren't necessarily meant to be high harm value. So we would expect that if our proactivity is being focused in that area, we wouldn't see a jump in our proactive harm. If we kind of switched that up and made our targets more high harm and value, then we're going to see this jump. Commercial harm is just continuing. It is moving up. This is very possibly influenced by level of reporting as well as ease of reporting. So I will say more online reports, making it a little easier to report, as well as noting some of the organized crime undertones of this. So we are continuing to monitor. So that puts us at the chief at a bit of a juncture when we talk about navigating priorities, right? As a police service, when we look at harm versus volume, we only have one front line, although we have multiple different kinds of resources within that front line. We are asked to handle both, one higher in volume and one higher in harm. So we do see ourselves, working with these kind of conflicting priorities as a police service. When we look at our mapping, so again, we can map our stats both on the volume, crime count, as well as harm. So we see how based on the different data lens we apply, we see a different picture. So all of these together give us the best operational knowledge as we go forward. And when we look at our harm year over year, we do see it focused in the downtown over the last couple of weeks. So I'll mention that. We did do a deep dive into the occurrences that have happened. So there has been 8 occurrences in the downtown core that relate to nearly half of our total community reported harm, right? So as I mentioned, as a safe city, when you have higher harm incidents happen, it really inflates our harm score in that area. So just keeping that in mind. Arrests have been made in all of the occurrences, and there are existing proactive measures in the downtown as part of our HEX. And speaking of our HEX initiative, just as a reminder, we applied hexagons across the city, took our highest harm hexagons, and our officers frontline are actively working on proactively patrolling those, but also creating proactive POP projects to address some of the root causes in those areas. So we've been doing that since October of last year, and here are some of the results. So citywide, we've seen a decrease in harm. And a big piece here as well as downtown, although we did see a few of those harmful incidents occur, we have seen a 450% increase of proactive harm. So we are down there, we are finding things, we are getting things off the street. And And we've seen over 145% increase in officer generated events. So we are down there. But unfortunately, things still do happen as much as we try to proactively prevent them from doing so. And that is everything.
Thank you, Ms. Sharman. Questions from the board? I have one. I think it's third or fourth slide where you said 31% of the calls are being generated by our officers.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that that's subsequent slide. What makes up that 31%? Do we know what the calls are that are coming in from our office? What?
Yeah, so them initiating traffic stops, them initiating proactive patrols, our guardians booking off at the library and things like that.
Okay, so we track that and see where that's.
Yes, as opposed to any of the calls that come in either through our non-emergency line or our 911 lines.
Thank you, Mr. Khan.
Thanks. There we go. Try that again. Thanks for the presentation. Informative. Would you believe I work in technology? There's a part of me that actually wishes this presentation would have come after the next one. And so, Chair, I'm wondering if it makes sense if you can. I trust you're going to remember the content of this presentation. If I just reserve my questions after that. There is a comparison between the two. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Once again, thank you. Board continually looks forward to the update on the statistics and how it manages our resources. So thanks, Ms. Sharman, for your update. I see the mayor is still stepped out. So we'll jump, if I may, just jump around the agenda. That's okay with the board. Deputy, very brief update on the section 14 that we reviewed last week and went before the South Simcoe board, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the South Simcoe Police Service presented to their board at their previous board meeting last month, and the South Simcoe Police Service Board has signed that agreement and returned it. So it's back before the board in regards to that. As I said, this will create efficiencies in regards to the shared services that we regularly do, mainly because we're co-located side by side, share a border for that. You yourself, Chair, have been the recipient of, I think, every email notification that we've sent, sometimes numerous ones. So this is just going to make the administrative side of that more efficient. It is something that we will continue to track in regards to the shared services and how often we use them. So over to you, Chair.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Otherwise, yeah, every time we do some shared services, we have to have an approval process for that. So this will allow us to, for that to happen. Any questions for the deputy on the motion to approve the section 14 agreement, Mr. Khan? Seconder?
Deputy, you're up.
I can second that.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Any questions or comments? Those in favor?
In favor.
Thank you. Thank you. Watching the time here and looking at the, well, we'll jump to the consent agenda. There's 4 items in the consent agenda. Community Safety Survey, 2027 budget timeline, our human resource. Well, I'm going to delay because our, if I can just leave that, park that for a minute. Our mayor has rejoined us, and now I'll move back up to number 6 on our agenda, a deputation request and approval from Dr. Josh Fletcher. Dr. Fletcher, just need to press the mic so those online can hear you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
As briefly mentioned, last month we had the senior command updated the board on the downtown initiative, and I think in part that generated Dr. Fletcher's request for a deputation. So Dr. Fletcher, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours, and then we'll open it up to questions from the board. On behalf of the board, thank you for your interest in our community and making things safer.
Well, I appreciate your invite and speedy acceptance, because I know it was last minute for accepting me on to speak today. And I think it's very interesting to talk after the last presentation. I wasn't aware of the hexagon approach that's being taken. It's very interesting to see which ones are red, green, and gray, and it lines up to what we're seeing. So I'm Dr. Josh Fletcher. I am the founder and medical director of Aero Medical. And one of our locations is probably in that hotspot downtown, I would say most definitely. We are within the PharmaSave. I am not PharmaSave. I don't work at PharmaSave, but our clinic is within PharmaSave. We're there for about 15 hours a week. And of those 15 hours during the weekdays, 12 hours that we're there. Now we do addiction medicine, mainly focusing on opiate use disorder. I say the vast majority of our patients who we're seeing at that location specifically are using fentanyl. The vast majority of patients at that location are unhoused. We see numerous people who go through the Heart Hub program. Now with the new Bridge House initiative, we're seeing a lot of individuals who are getting housed right off the tip in there, which is excellent. We also have a lot of individuals who come from Busby, from Salvation Army, which is just around the corner. So this is like the typical type of individual who we're treating. And our treatments kind of encompass all of the options that exist out there for opiate use disorder, and we try to meet the patient as much as we can where they're at. And for us, we know that getting them on treatment decreases their medical risk, for sure, but decreases the risk of hospitalization, decreases the risk of being involved with the criminal justice system. That's why I wanted to have that conversation today. The biggest issue that we're having, and the reason I reached out to Mayor, not only I appreciate you getting me involved here today, is we're having numerous individuals who are now congregating on the main street right in front of our clinic. And I would say that at least 50% of these individuals are not patients of our clinic, and I have absolutely no idea who they are. And I can say this looking kind of at videos and pictures that staff at the clinic and pharmacy is sending me, as well as our video records, that I don't know who these people are. They're members of the community, but they're not our patients. There are patients of ours who are there, but they're not all of our patients. And it's a huge problem for you. It's a huge problem for yourself, Mayor, and it's a huge problem for us. And the reason it's a huge problem for us is I've gotten feedback from numerous patients that they don't feel safe coming to the clinic, that people who are seeking out help, who would therefore still be maybe involved with the criminal justice system, still using the hospital and the emergency room frequently, are not seeking out assistance because they're worried about this problem. And we have another location, but it's not as centrally located to all these resources like Busby and Salvation Army and CMHA. And we have the detox, we have Heart Hub, specifically referring people to myself and specifically referring people to our clinic who are not wanting to seek out care. So that's why I wanted to chat today. And I really want to brainstorm and hear any questions to see how we can better address this. And if there's anything that we can do on our end to better address it. We've already taken the initiative and like personally hired private security, which seemed to be helpful within the clinic itself and somewhat right in front of the clinic, but people will just shift like to the next door and just down the street from us. And I am repeatedly told that, oh, it's public property, you can't do anything, we're sitting here. This is what they're telling us. And we've tried numerous times kind of involving the police and seeing what can be done, but doesn't always work out, and maybe they'll be moved for half an hour and then come right back, right? And it's become very problematic for us. And I'm kind of at a loss of answers. The one question that I've got and one question we discussed last week is why specifically is it in front of our clinic? And that's something I've been pondering a lot this week after our conversation last week. I have a few answers to that question. One is just the location of our clinic specifically being right on the main street. There's 3 clinics very close by. One is kind of sequestered in its own complete private property, and therefore they have the ability to move people off because it is private property. One is on the second, and the OATC is also on the second floor of a building. So if you're not in the clinic, you're kind of going up and you're leaving. There's no need to stand right up front, for example, if you're waiting for an appointment. So that might be one case if we're running behind, but that's a minority of people who are waiting for the appointment. Again, there's many people who are there who are not. That's one piece. The second piece, and I hope this is the reason, but I think that we do a good job at what we do. We get referrals from Park like I said, specifically from the detox center that's specifically sending to myself and our team, because we work very closely with them and we really like to collaborate with the community and the community resources that are there. We have Canadian Mental Health that comes into our clinics specifically to help meet people where they're at and really help when someone's there and identify that state of change that they're in and really try to help. So we keep all the resources central. Maybe that's another reason people are coming there. The last one I was thinking is maybe some of the services that we offer. We do have, as a part of our treatment options, one of those options being that safe opiate supply program, but we're not the only ones who do that, and all 3 clinics offer it. So I don't think that's it, but I kind of just see us being that location that's right in the main street of why that's happening. But I really wanted to chat today and hear any questions and brainstorm if there's anything that can be done and anything that we can do differently to help solve this problem. As someone who's taken that oath to do no harm and really cares about the community, I care about my patients, but I also care about the public, and I care about potential individuals who might not be seeking help because they're worried about this issue. So I'll yield the rest of my time and open up to any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Fletcher, for taking the time to speak with us this morning. It's clear you do have a concern for not just your patients, but our community. I'll open up for questions. First, Mayor Nuttall, then Mr. Khan, and I see Deputy Mayor Thompson will be third. So, in that order, please, folks.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Dr. Fletcher, for coming out. We spent about probably about 40 minutes, 45 minutes chatting last Wednesday, I think it was. And there's a lot of things I think that perhaps on approach, maybe I don't agree with on the harm reduction side. I don't think that's what we're actually here discussing today. I think that there's a problem. To call it, just call it out. I've called out at council, I will call it out here. There's a problem at what I'll refer to as the block where PharmaSave is and you are, the McDonald's is, and it's daily. It's not, sporadic. And, where I'm struggling is when we had our conversation, it's like, well, why is yours different? And I think I accept a little of what you just said, because, that's a bit of an update from the conversation that we had. But as we go forward, or why don't we go in the past? Do you report this to the police, like as a pharmacy, like when there's an issue, like if I can imagine if it was one of our family health team clinics and there were individuals stopping other individuals from going into the clinic because they were scared to get in, it'd be a pretty quick response to deal with that. A kid with a fractured arm trying to figure out if he has a fractured arm or not, right? So have you reached out to the police in the past?
So a couple things there. I'll say that, I appreciate the first point you said where, I know we don't see eye to eye on the harm reduction piece, but I appreciate still the opportunity to collaborate because I think we are working towards the same goal. The second thing I'll just clarify is like there's the pharmacy, then there's myself at the clinic, but the pharmacies are obviously all the time, myself only being there for the few hours. For when I am there, yes, we have. We do. I have taken steps as well if I'm ever concerned in the clinic, banning individuals, and then I do that frequently if we feel like we need to. I would imagine the pharmacy does the same thing with banning individuals, but yes, we have.
So I think one of the things that we struggle with is that public space that you identified, right, as one of the concerns to come forward. But I'm wondering if, and maybe it's legal from the service, Mr. Chair, there has to be some sort of law out there that guarantees an individual to be able to access medical service. And protect the entrance to medical services. And I can think of one right off the bat that I know of, but there's probably many laws that address this. And I don't think that deals with the day-to-day operation of how we could possibly enforce this at this point. But this to me, every time I get a photo sent to me about downtown, okay, I would say 85% of them are within 50 meters of this location. And I get photos sent every single week. So this is, I know we know that it's a problem area. I know we're struggling with what the law allows us to do and doesn't allow us to do. I've never thought of this from a medical practice perspective and access to such services. And perhaps we need to go and ask that question.
Okay, what I'll do, Your Worship, is I'll go around the table with questions and then I'll ask you, Mayor, to provide their comment. That's I think Mr. Khan was next, then Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll spare everyone any overlap that we had, I think, Mayor, so certainly acknowledge your comments. Dr. Fletcher, first of all, thank you for being willing to put yourself forward in the spotlight on the conversation and stepping up to do so. So appreciate it. Thank you. The first thing I'm going to ask you, it's a bit of a challenge, not at you, but to ask you to clarify and explain. And I've noticed in the last month or so, in terms of the more general public response or engagement around the topic, a bit of an escalation around the discussion that certain procedures or treatments that are being offered, and I'm going to ask you to clarify them. This is not a statement. This is a request for clarification. Are being viewed as keeping those who would either be referred to as users or addicts or patients in a state of what is commonly referred to as a zombified state, so that some of the medicine or the treatment or what is being prescribed, although it may be referred to as a safe alternative, is actually having a similar impact of keeping them in that same state. And that is likely, if I'm interpreting the comments that I'm and the questions that are coming to me directly, contributing to that tendency to congregate and then just camp out or drop anchor, for lack of a better word. Sorry about that, but just to be in that zone. Yeah. So can you, one, I heard you that you said a X percentage of people that you've noted who are in the area may or may not be your patient. And then also speak medically to that, the byproduct of the medicine, keeping them in that state.
So I'm going to take it a step further and say, rather than month, I would say this is a pattern of the last 3 or 4 months. And it is not a byproduct of our medication, but it's a byproduct of the actual drug supply. I'm not sure if anyone's interested in this area, you will have heard of what may be happening in the state of Philadelphia and kind of how their drug supply looks. And we are now seeing it here in Barrie, we're seeing it in Toronto. And we get most of our data from Toronto, and we assume what's happening in Toronto is making its way up here. And it's not the program, because the program we're discussing is not new. It's been around for about 2 years. And there are not, like, we have new people who are starting, but it's not that there's been a big uptick in the last 2 months or 3 months. It's that the drug supply itself has changed in the last 3 months. And we're seeing the presence of a specific tranquilizer called medetomidine. And that medetomidine is exactly what you're describing. It's what's causing that, for lack of a better word, zombified state, that people are completely sedated, that individuals are found like bent over and are not responding to Narcan. If anyone on the service here has had to administer that to someone and they're not seeing any sort of improvement in their state, that's because of this actual tranquilizer that's in the drug supply, which is making things worse. And that's new within the last 3 months. So this exact thing, I'm just going to change what we stated. It's not because of the programs. It's because of the new drugs. And that's specifically why I'm even more concerned that people aren't accessing treatment now, because this is so dangerous. It's flooding the ICU beds, it's flooding the emergency department. It's extremely tough to treat and it's extremely tough to respond to. And we've seen that uptick in that last 3 months.
Just for clarification.
Now, I'm going to cut off the discussion about the medical side of things here because we could talk about that all morning.
Yeah.
That's not the purpose of the meeting, and what's being administered and what's not being administered is how we can solve it. So just, we could keep it to the police service side of things.
If I may, for just a second, I would say that the medical piece there would be that what we're seeing downtown is because of this tranquilizer, because of that change in drug, because our treatments haven't changed. And I wish we had new treatments. I would love to have new things to address this, but that drug supply that's changed in the last 3 months might be why these numbers from January to June are so crazy. Looking at that graph of the uptick that's happened downtown, these numbers are insane, and that's because these drugs are insane, and people are going to insane lengths to get them because they feel so sick and are seizing and are heading to the hospital and all these things because of the drugs.
Thank you, Chair. The point was to sort of see why are people camping out and being in close proximity. You're suggesting that you're about 50%. I'm trying to look at what's happening right in front of that area.
Yes.
Actually, separately regarding from a policing stance and perspective, you're looking for options and what we can do to come together to solve the regional challenge. The question may not be to you, it may be through you, Chair, to the chief when you're ready. And that is just with the Guardians program and with the increased presence of special constables in the downtown core. What limitations do special constables, as a byproduct of being a special constable, not a police sworn officer, what limitations are presented in terms of what laws are available or what they can do to address the challenge regarding moving people along or say, enforcing bylaw or enforcing laws? Is there a limitation regarding special constables specifically?
Again, I'll defer to the senior command until everybody's had a chance. Deputy Mayor Thompson. Deputy Mayor. Chief or deputy, would you like to provide some comments, please?
There we go. Doctor, thank you through you, Chair. Certainly, so from the operational side of the house here, an interesting perspective and certainly not, probably not desired to be heard, but I am going to speak to the fact that this becomes incredibly challenging. To your point, Doctor, I think we face a very real situation where our concerns are probably very much aligned with the intention of your people, though your clients, going in there to address their medical condition. We're also aware that the mere presence of us can have a dual effect. We are not seeking to criminalize a percentage or a group within our population. And does the presence of police at this situation exacerbate and perhaps suggest to your clientele who may used to go in there freely, see us there, does that impact them not going in there to seek that treatment, which we're not looking to do? From the policing perspective, certainly there are always options. And the applications of certain laws where appropriate, our special constables are certainly able to do that. I think in your information, one of our inspectors in charge of operational support is already going to be speaking with you, so we can begin this conversation with our personnel and what we can do. But certainly, from a policing perspective, Chair, through you, and we're not talking about the medical side, but that is the beautiful thing about science. Like I did not know, and it is. I do thank you for that information with respect to the new impact that I was unaware of, and so that certainly does offer some strong concerns, but insight into what we're seeing. And I would, from an operational perspective, want to recognize and comment that while we can go out on the street and our officers would not drive past an intoxicated person, because there is a legal, ethical, and moral obligation to stop that, like to for the well-being of that individual, either transport them to the hospital because they're so inebriated they can't take care of themselves, or they're going to be sleeping off that alcohol in our cells. We are allowed by law to do that. There is no law that forces or allows us to interact with an individual in what I've heard referred to as the fentanyl fold, but clearly from other instances, we are challenged, Chair. And so while I know there are expectations of our community, there are things we can do and there's things that we cannot do. With respect to the physical location, certainly happy to interact and certainly happy to offer some suggestions and some advice, which may or may not be desired, but at the same time, the location is great, but the location is not great for a whole host of reasons from our perspective. So,
And if I may, just to answer the question, you're right. It's a very delicate issue with what you said with the policing presence. And what I would just say to that is, whenever I'm seeing somebody, myself, my physician colleagues and our staff are saying, once you see us, get your medicine and move on, right? Then please don't loiter outside, and we ask people repeatedly not to. And if that's what it takes to kind of have your involvement, even though that might have detrimental effects for some people, down the line, I'm hopeful that that downstream effect will mean that people aren't hanging out and listening to us and not staying. And that will mean less involvement for yourself and more people are actually accessing that care.
Thank you, Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. My apologies. I didn't hear you the first time. Thank you, Dr. Fletcher, and I appreciate your commentary and your approach to this. A quick question. You said that you're only there for several hours a week. It's not a full-time location for you. I was just curious, are you the physician that prescribes the methadone, or is that through the PharmaSave? That's a service provided at all times.
We are the ones, we, as in myself and my physician colleagues, are the ones who prescribe it, and then the pharmacy will dispense it. And if I just prescribe it, they usually pick it up every single day from the pharmacy and is witnessed every single day from the pharmacy. So even though I'm not there, they're still having to go to the pharmacy every day to get it.
And with the alternative supply, the street name Dilly's and stuff like that, that's only when you're present?
Repeat that question. Sorry, I don't know if I understand.
So with the medical grade heroin, I know the street name, they call them Dilly's and
Yes.
stuff like that. Is that only prescribed while you're there?
Yeah, so that's hydromorphone. So similar to, let's say, morphine or an oxycodone you might get from a surgery or from dental pain. And that is being prescribed by myself or my physician colleagues and being dispensed throughout the week by the pharmacy. And they have to go to the pharmacy every single day, have an assessment by the pharmacist every single day. And the pharmacist is in constant communication with us about that treatment, letting us know if there's any concerns, and we are acting accordingly. But it's being given every day, but we're not there to oversee it every single day.
And now you said 50% of the population is not your clients and the other 50 are, and you believe the number would be higher if the surrounding environment was more conclusive of people seeking help. But I've actually met people there. I took a gentleman for breakfast who was very concerned about the surrounding area, just to get his perspective. And he said that he was doing well at the time he was going through treatment, but because of the surrounding area, he was always very nervous if his life shifted back to, some form of negative impact, a job, a spouse, partner, disagreement or something, that there was so much opportunity to fall back into the bad habits do you believe that you have to be at that location? Are you, because of the pharmacy connection, because anybody seeking help, it's a very transient population, will move to follow the help. So is there a way that we could find in one of our services? And I understand the Heart Hub doesn't allow this, but I'm saying, do you need to be at that location? Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they call it safe supply, which I disagree with that term, but it's a whole different discussion. Um, People are taking them, then turning around and selling them for the much more potent synthetic fentanyl, the drug you're speaking of now that's coming through the streets, and then with methadone, people, it's called cupping, where they take it outside and it's bridging them till they can get the fentanyl instead of actually getting on the road of recovery. And I noticed that we don't use Suboxone anymore to the same level. Like when methadone started, it was a whole program, urine tests to make sure that people were on the program, on the path of recovery, not as a bridge, to stay out of dope sickness. So I was just wondering if, like, every measure and every way this is being administered is actually helping and not creating the environment outside. Because if somebody walks out with any of the stuff you're providing them, if they're then in turn selling it, you're creating the environment out front of the store because people know where to pick up and linger and do what they're doing. So I was just wondering, has there been a consideration to actually move your location? Because if I'm seeking help, I will travel. I
Um,
was just curious.
I appreciate the question. I will say two things with regards to actually moving the location. I'm open to wherever we need to be able to offer these services. I will state that our population is so transient and so unwell that it's so much about capturing an individual in that moment when they're ready to make that change and trying to be there as much as possible to where that individual is. And if all of these resources that people are accessing, like Salvation Army, like Busby, like CMHA, are all within a certain radius, then it's important to have our services within that radius. Now, if that changes and these services are ending up being spread out, and for example, the bridge housing, which is now not in the downtown area, of course, that makes total sense. And I'd be more than happy to have that conversation. The second piece, Deputy Mayor, is I'd be more than happy to have a more wholesome discussion about the medical piece that you were bringing up another time, if you'd be welcome to that. And we can find a time to meet about that. I will say, though, that, like I said before, I do take kind of my oath to do no harm very seriously, and I strongly believe that I'm not contributing to the problem. But that's just, I know we have difference of opinion there. But like I said, I'd be happy to discuss that offline as well if you'd be interested.
Absolutely. And yeah, I would always make time for this and stuff. I believe knowledge and different voices, different approaches is, what drives a better community. And I just think that we're seeing some of the remnants of the great intention of, what medical people are doing, but I just don't know if it's translating. I think we've tried certain approaches. You look at BC and very open to a lot of different approaches, and it's still 50% of our overdose deaths. It's, the largest area. So I think a different approach, which I believe the city policing and everything is on that path today. The pendulum is swinging a little bit to the other side, but I'm always open to that conversation. But I think, to your point, the transient, if all the services are, you know, in one area, this is the behavior. Because if you're 50% are getting help and 50% are not seeking help, these two clash. The number of people getting help will decrease more than the number of people not seeking help because they're vulnerable even in the recovery stages.
Absolutely. And the biggest highlight I would say is that drug supply that's changing, and the change we've seen in the last 3 months that's kind of contributed to that. I find that the field of addiction medicine is fascinating, and why I love it is we're always on our toes and trying to be reactive to those changes. And I think that those changes in the drug supply are what's driving some of our treatments that we're offering and really driving this problem.
Mayor
Agree
Nuttall,
is-
briefly,
Sorry.
Robert, or Deputy Mayor, got to cut this off. We're way over time. We have a full agenda today to go over. So briefly, Mayor Nuttall, with respect to policing, the problem, and if you could, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I had promised Dr. Fletcher that you'd be out of here about 8 minutes ago. He's got to be in providing support at 9. I think we should probably end this, but I think there's a follow-up conversation to have between the executive team at Barrie Police Service, the city, and Dr. Fletcher. I just want to say, look, leave the medical stuff aside because, you know, as Chair said, that's not why we're here. The fact that we're having this conversation and that everybody's at the table is a major step forward. There definitely are concerns about how the medical side is done from lots of folks, including myself. But before I can get into the conversation of that, we need to work through this. So thank you, Dr. Fletcher. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and really appreciate everybody this morning and their questions.
Thank you, Dr. Fletcher. Getting back, I guess, thank you for the patience and allowing me to jump around the agenda. Chief, back to number 8, workload analysis, and I think we'll hear from Ms. Sharman again on that. Chief, I don't know if you have any opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair. Very brief. This was an ask of the board. And what you received in the packages is directly from the research that does exist in a very thorough and thoughtful answer. And Madison is going to speak specifically to that and answer any questions you may have, which I am sure you will. Thank you.
Welcome again.
Welcome, happy to be back. So today we're going to talk about the workload analysis, and this request originally came from the board looking for more evidence-based and data-informed processes to staffing. So that was brought to the EVP unit, in which we kind of did a deep dive and have put together some light reading for the board and the public that I promise it's nice and easy for you. Okay. I do want to start off by talking about, I want us to picture this as a piece of a pie. So the workload analysis looks at frontline only, boots on the ground, which is, you know, obviously very important part of policing. But there's a lot of other aspects that support that, right? So we have a tactical unit, we have mental health teams, we have records units, we have communicators, we have digital evidence management. So this workload analysis is really isolating the front line, boots on the ground. But again, I just want us to think of this as a piece of the pie. And of course, with police data, there's always limitations. So again, we're using the best data available that we have. And thank you to Sam and Maria and Creighton for helping with all of those pieces. So we're presenting the best information that we have available to us, but there's always going to be some caveats, and those are mentioned in the light reading. So looking into the research on staffing and policing, we found 4 main approaches. So one, the per capita, then the authorized level, minimum staffing, and then the workload based. So from the research, the workload based is really seen as kind of the gold standard. And so that is the method that the EVP unit and its police partners took on. So the workload approach is meant to be more holistic in nature. So I will say this presentation and most of the data focuses specifically on the demand and strategic allocation part of the information, but there's also, you know, the 3 components of also the human capital pipeline that talks a lot about retention first strategies, keeping the people you have while onboarding new people, as well as the operational environment and alternatives. And that research speaks to, exploring innovation, flexibility, certain civilianizations or specialties. So altogether, it's meant to not just be a hire and deploy, but kind of like a whole systems approach. But our focus is really looking at the demand and strategic allocation with the data that we have. So speaking of said data, the workload analysis is built specifically on CAD data, so that volume data. And I know as a unit, as a service, as a board, we talk a lot about harm. So I do want to say harm is not integrated into this analysis, mainly because it's meant to be frontline volume driven. So the idea here, and we are making assumptions that the higher harm incidents take up more time. So that's meant to be kind of controlled within this analysis through different kind of proxy variables. So we're looking at CAD, looking at frontline pressure. And we also went very, very conservative with our data in order to provide the most accurate picture of frontline. So we started with our total calls for service, which is at that 81,000. Then we looked at calls that police actually went to, right? Because a lot of times it's triaged by communicators. It could be our alternative response unit or our VCR unit doing things from in-house. So when you layer that down, you see 47,000. And then from that, police, as we talked about, can be very proactive and they can generate their own calls and do all of this great stuff. But in order to do the workload analysis, we wanted to know strictly community demand for our officers. So that's where we then looked at officer attended and reactive only calls for service. So that has brought us down to the 29,000 number. And that's what the workload analysis is based on. And then a couple of the key kind of guiding benchmarks for this analysis. The first one is the 20 officer roster or platoon. So the research will talk a lot about kind of like your minimum staffing levels, but as a police service, we don't have that number. So we worked with our 20 officer deployable platoon to input that information. The next that research talks about is the idea of a shift relief factor. So to have one single boot on the ground, how many officers do we need to have to fill that all the time? So this is really big in policing. We have large legislative requirements for training, different presumptive legislations for people who are off, court time, sick time, because officers can't work from home, right? So we have to always have people filling those spots. So that's a big part of this. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Then we have this 1/3 model, and this is also coming from research talking about a third of an officer's day should be reactive calls for service, a third should be proactive efforts, and then a third should be administration. So that's another benchmark that we used for this estimate. And then lastly, we talk a lot, of course, as a service and a board of evidence-based policing, right? And looking at both crime suppression through reaction, but also crime prevention. And a lot of crime prevention will come from either proactive time or administrative time. So just understanding that as kind of a benchmark that the board and the service have set together. So the workload approach, I will kind of say here before we go into it, the results of the analysis finds that based on 2025 data, we would need an increase of 36 police constables. And so I know that is a big number and it's very a little bit shocking, but I will work backwards. And then we have also finance and HR here to answer any questions of those natures. So when looking at the workload approach, we took all of these 6 steps to get to that number, obviously in depth in the report, but I'll do the highlights here. So as I mentioned, the shift relief factor is looking at how many officers we need to make sure there's always one officer working or one boot on the ground, right? Vacation time, parental leave, court time, training time, are all unavoidable realities as our profession. So what we looked at is our actual data through finance in terms of attendance rates. And we found that on average, we have a real world attendance rate of 70%. So if we had 100 officers scheduled, 70 of them are boots on the ground. Out of our 20 officer roster, that would mean on average every year, or every hour of the year, we have about 14.2 officers working out of our 20. So just kind of showing a little bit of the calculation. So looking at the inverse of that shift relief factor to get our 1.4. So again, a little bit more of a visual. knowing this data, we have it in our hands, it's tangible. We need to therefore staff accordingly to what we know and what the data is saying. So out of a 20 officer roster, our target would be 20 officers working. But again, based on training, port, sick time, vacation leaves, all of those pieces, we can assume about 6 people off doing those things per shift, which leaves us with our 14. So we can't get to a 20-20, but if we do want 20 working on the road at any single point, we then need to staff the platoons to 29. So taking that 20 and factoring in the shift relief factor. So again, just what that would look like, not saying this would land perfectly and equal through an HR strategy, but ideally, based on the numbers, it's an additional 9 constables per platoon. Now, the shift relief factor is one piece of the methodology. And then there's also this 3-3-3 model looking at, an officer's shift as kind of a secondary methodology within this umbrella. So the idea behind that, like I said, 33% call response, 33% proactivity, 33% administration. I will say based on the board's goals, right, we can always adjust these numbers. I will say research says that there should be no more than 60% of an officer's shift responding to calls. It's kind of called the saturation index, where we start really risking burnout and those other pieces. I do want to talk about administrative time for a second, because this is kind of, from an analyst perspective, really like the great unknown of policing. We know when an officer is booked on a call and booked off the call. That is very simple in terms of our CAD data, which is still often kind of underestimated, but nonetheless. But the time doing shift briefing, the time doing paperwork, the time consulting with crowns, the time looking people up on our record system, right? These are all administrative tasks that are very heavy within policing, especially as we're seeing more, risk assessments being legislated or paperwork for court. So it's very time consuming, but it's kind of a shadow number because we don't have that very specifically tracked. So I will say when I look at the average of our impaired calls that resulted in impaired charges on scene, we're looking at about 11 minutes, right? From them stopping to the car, talking to the person, identifying that this is going to result in a charge. However, and again, anecdotally speaking to our traffic members and sergeants, as well as communicating with our communications manager on how this is tracked, then they have to bring that person to the station, book that person in, do breath tests 20 minutes apart, do all the court paperwork. So there's a huge administrative burden in policing that we don't really count for right now. And I think that's really important for us to keep in mind. So when we look at our actual justification and where we're sitting with this target right now at Barrie Police, call response is taking up 56.1% of our time. So this is including legislative lunch and breaks. So it's counting a 10.5-hour shift rather than a 12-hour shift. If we count just a pure 12-hour shift, it changes a little bit, but of course, officers should be taking their legislative breaks. So from here, we see call response hitting about 56%. And I just want to remind everybody about that saturation index of 60% leading to severe burnout. Proactivity sits at 0.3%. And I know that that may be really hard because we're hearing a lot of volume of proactivity, especially with the presentation I did with the board. So from this, what I do want to say is, not to spoil it, but we do have 277 hours of proactivity. That equals to over 1,000 15-minute hotspot checks. So proactivity is ultimately kind of short, sweet, snappy. Makes sense that there's less, but I think with our demand and our ask, even an ask that just happened at the board, right, an increase in presence for proactivity, we really need to open up the space for officers to have the time to do the things we're asking. And then there's kind of an assumption that all other time that's not accounted, either call response or proactivity, is there for administration, right? So that could be fueling the car, doing those checks, briefings, all of those things. So number wise, what it looks like, our call response is taking up about 61,000 hours, which is sitting at 56%. If we want to bring that down to 33%, we need to increase our road capacity in order to meet that. So right now, like I said, our proactivity is sitting at 277 hours, and then all leftover road time based on 10.5-hour shifts with the lunch break factored in, sits at 108,000. If we want to increase that proactivity, we need to then 333 for all of it. So we would increase proactivity to 61,000 hours, and increase administration to 60, which means we need more bodies on the road to open up that operation capacity. So as I said, this is kind of like an alternative method. This came up to 38 constables. Our shift relief factor came up to 36. So two kind of different and independent methodologies are bringing us to the same number. So ultimately, when we look at, based on the research, based on the data, the staffing recommendations based on 2025 numbers and research would be increasing platoon strength from 20 to 29, a total of 36 constables in addition to our current frontline complement. That's it.
Questions? The chair has a number of, I'll defer to the members first. Mr. Khan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I imagine others will have several. That was not a light read, by the way. But it was a thorough read, and I certainly appreciate you and your team putting it together. And yes, we did ask for it, so thank you for it. First thing, an observation, I note that your study and your report makes a very strong effort to try and shuffle the deck in any number of ways based on other models that are used elsewhere or previous models. And in each one, the result comes up short, that something has to give, that something is lacking. That's not an excuse for let's go on a hiring spree. It identifies that in all cases, proactive policing sort of got the short straw. And that's noted. I do have a question. I mentioned earlier that I would ask you sort of a comparison between this report and the last one, and that is just for some clarity, likely founded in count versus time regarding proactive. In one instance, you're saying we're doing a fair amount of proactive work. In another instance, you're saying we don't have the capacity to do any proactive work. Can you speak to that first? I have a follow-up.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, proactivity takes a lot less time. So when we do our reactive calls, we did it based on the average of our calls for service time on scene, which is 123 minutes. Whereas when we talk about proactive, right, if we want to do 15-minute hotspot checks, that's a lot shorter. So you can get a lot more proactivity in with less time. But I will note that that is frontline proactivity. So that is going to the hotspot booking off. That's not coming to the EBP unit asking where they should go. That's not them doing proactive admin work on the front end, designing these POP projects. So it's underestimated in terms of the proactivity for the administration time because that's not counted. That's kind of lumped into admin. So I think there's a bit more to be said on the proactive. But I will also note too, when it looks at our reactive time, that also includes an officer getting to the call. So when we do proactive pieces, we're already there. So that will count out any travel time, as well as there are kind of nuances in terms of how that's booked off. If they're there for the 15 minutes, are they putting start and the full 15 minutes, or is it a shorter period, even though they were already there? So there's a couple of those little nuances in terms of our data and just the limitations we have naturally. But ideally, what's happening in proactive and the data limitations in proactive are also bleeding into reactive, so we can kind of reconcile those. So basically, we're asking them to do more efficient and quicker than anything else that they do. So just understanding those pieces.
Thank you. Follow up real quick. On the table on page 7, is my math accurate or inaccurate that frontline makes up 82%? Sorry, I did that math wrong. 100 out of the 250 are deployed to frontline.
That is the authorized strength. That is not necessarily saying that there's 100 deployed. Right now we have 82.
So it's 0.7 of that, I think you said, or something.
So the availability and the attendance rate would be different than the rate of authorized versus deployable.
Okay. And what the public sees is the front line. The public doesn't see everything else in terms of investigative and
Yep.
administrative.
Yep.
Okay. The dollar value, has that been assessed in terms of adding the 9? That 40% in order to make up for the 0.7 and all that kind of thing, has that been assessed?
Page 2 of the summary has the dollar amount and the budget impact, which is about looks like around 4% in fiscal 2027.
So when looking at that, I believe from Ty's number and previously accepted pieces, it's looking at hiring 12. And I think it would take up 2.6% of 2027's budget. But Ty is also here and Steve to do kind of like the specific budget questions.
I did want that just, discussed here, and because we have a comparison that we also have a deficit. And I'm just wanting it all on the table. We have a deficit regarding court security costs. And I just want to say, where is money that already exists that we're already spending that we're not seeing the benefit of locally that is actually causing us to not be able to put those in frontline dollars? I have one more. Lastly, though, you did make a comment. I just want to note it. The computer recording of time on an active call is only pertaining to on scene with the call, not all of the additional work. And I note that you don't have the technical or computer aided capacity to track it because it requires reporting, et cetera. Correct?
That is correct. Yep.
And best guess was, you said something like, 11 minutes compared to 2 hours.
Yeah. So looking, for example, at admin for impaired, it would be 11 minutes of the officer, kind of roadside at the car. And then closing off once that person gets in the cruiser, time on scene ends. And then there's no more tracked in terms of specifically how long it took for them to do a crown brief or the breathalyzer and those pieces.
Okay, last question. To your first report, you identified that there are some programs that sort of go through a cycle of what we're going to target in terms of an activity. High harm versus quantity of calls. So you mentioned we have a second degree murder. That's going to require all sorts of services, all sorts of attendance, et cetera. That's not something we're actually proactively going after, though. So let's say something else that's high harm. Compared to everything else that every other member of the community has on their mind in terms of unwanted persons, other activities that are harmful but not scoring as high on the harm. So if we're going to attend to one thing, it draws all of our attention over there, and hypothetically, it leaves the balance of people underserviced on their priorities. Is that a fair statement?
I would say hypothetically, Chief. It's based on the services priorities and where they're putting their resources. So something has to give ultimately.
Based on the current complement of frontline officers, not based on the recommended or proposed.
Yep.
Mayor Nuttall, then Ms. Strawn, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chief. So, I had been one of the voices to ask for this report, and I think that it aptly shows that there is an increase in frontline officers that are needed. I have no appetite to increase more inside the building. I have an appetite to increase on the road. I think that's what it is saying. So I guess what I'm looking for from the chief to answer your question is how many years is if the number is 36 or 38 during numbers that we were short, how many years is a reasonable time to get to that point where we are up to the number?
I can actually speak to that if that's okay on behalf of the chief. We've spoken with HR, and the strategy we have right now is 12 for this year and then 8, 8, 8 to get to the complement split between experienced and new hires. But Steve is here also to speak a little bit more in depth about that and the flexibility based on what the board would like to see.
And Sheriff, I know Steve is here, and I do want to give him the opportunity to speak to this. And I guess in the reality, though, too, is, and to the mayor's point, this is our recommendation, but certainly under the purview of the board to ask for different approaches. But I do think that given the recognition, this is what we're looking at. This is a prudent approach, but I'll defer here to Mr. Bound.
Good morning. Thank you. Just one, just very, very quick correction to what Ms. Sharman said. The strategy would actually be 12 officers in 2027. So not this year, be next year, and then 8 a year thereafter. The blend would be 50% new recruits and 50% experienced officers. We feel that is a very achievable strategy from a hiring standpoint and is the best strategy from a training and fiscal responsibility perspective as well.
Anything further, Mr. Marinello?
Nope, that's good for me. Thank you.
Ms. Strawn?
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to thank all of the members involved in putting this report together. It's very comprehensive, a lot of data. As Mr. Khan said, it wasn't a light read, but I appreciate all of the information that went into the report. I was in looking at it, and I was just wondering where, like, we say, right, we want, say, 33% of the officers' time to go to proactive policing. Can I ask why?
Chief?
Thank you for the question, Member Strawn. Unapologetically, we are focused on harm-focused policing, as you're well aware, and with the recognition that there is a direct relationship with the increase in proactivity and its influence on on reactive crime taking place as a result. So, and I know this is sort of an abstract argument, but if we have officers out there and are legally and within guardrails, pulling over a whole bunch of vehicles, and they're being incredibly proactive, and they're getting guns out of cars. What's not occurring is us going to robberies, potentially. Not saying it's a one-to-one relationship, but the likelihood of that occurring. The more proactive you are, the stronger the recognition by the community, but also with the potential to influence that actual reactive crime later down the road further. So proactively detected means it's stopping something before it occurs to some degree. I know Madison wants to chime in here, though. That's okay, Chair.
Yes, however, it's getting long here we're almost an hour behind our agenda.
I'll just make a quick note on the research because I understand you're saying where is that 3.3 coming from in terms of the research. So a lot of it comes off the saturation index, talks about wellness research and how when you hit that 60%, officers are then at risk of burnout. But that research only talks about proactive reactive. So we say 60 reactive, 40 proactive. And so then more recent research kind of looked to balance the scales of that a little bit, understanding the increase in administrative load. So that's where that kind of splitting in thirds came from, is balancing administration work, not hitting that 60% and 40%. So kind of equalizing the field on all of those aspects.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I echo the comments about all the effort that's gone into this. Oh, sorry, Ms. Strawn, you got further question?
You know what, Mr. Chair, I do have some other questions. If I can confirm, we're not making a decision on this report today, so I have an opportunity to ask some questions offline, and I'll do that.
Yeah, that is the intent, and I will, if I may, take some of the time to add a few comments. One, Chief, we add 36 officers. That's generating 36 more workloads. Where's the upstream? You know, we got to redact 36 more body worns. We got to, you know, that this is only dealing with the front line. We all know that when you add a frontline officer, it has a significant impact on the rest of the organization. That's not in the report. So that needs to be addressed, I think. I think we should also look at, and I know you have, but how do we change the 1.4 to 1.2? So we don't need more ops. We got more on the road. I know in our wellness programs and all that, but so it's not just adding. How can we get more on the road quicker so that we're dealing with the 1.4. How many hours of pay duty do our officers do a year? Maybe we do pay duties in blocks. We have no training costs, no healthcare costs, no uniform costs, but they do extra shifts. Anybody thought of something like that? So yeah, we still have the overtime costs, but we're not paying for and training a brand new officer to fill in blocks. So instead of doing pay duties, why don't you see if the officer wants to do a pay duty for an extra block? Maybe that's burnout and all that. I realize that, but I'm just trying to think of what other options are than just hiring more people. And my last comment, this document was generated, I believe, completely internally.
That's correct.
So is there any mechanism, excuse me, to have a third party look at it and say, yeah, this makes sense. Oh, no, it's not enough. Or this is, guys are offside here. When Mr. Turner gives us a financial report, we have an auditor take a look at it and say, yeah, these numbers are right. Who's telling the board other than internally that this is a reasonable expectation of our service to provide adequate and effective policing of our city?
Chair, a fair question. We are exploring with an external police service as well that has gone through this this practice, as well as the actual some of the basis of the research in the first place. And I do believe it was Member Strawn who brought up the Michigan State Police Observatory. That is a lot of this research is based upon, and we are engaging in conversation with them, and with the acceptance of the board, we've already we've reached out initially, but we'd like to share this with them and to have those tires kicked.
Perfect. I think there's an expectation from the community when at some point we're going to go in front of council and ask for money, that where did these numbers come from, rather than just an internal document. So Madison?
May I add too, it's not an internal methodology. So the methodology is based on research and out of the Michigan Staffing Observatory, just the calculations were done in-house. So I do want to just note that as well.
But I think as a board, we want some verification that there's another methodology out there that says we only need 8.
Absolutely. Yep.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying we need some type, in my opinion, some type of verification to support, because it is a significant ask of our. Well, I say a lot of work's gone into it, and it has been a direct request of this board that we take a look at. We got to our 250 last year, and that was what we were major milestone. Now, where do we need to go? Thank you very much, everyone. Consent agenda. There are 4 items in today's consent: community safety and survey, 2027 budget timeline, human resource report, and special constables and auxiliary terminations. Would anyone like any of those items pulled? Chair has one, unfortunately, in terms of timing. In terms of the community safety survey, and Jenna, you might be the best. I'm concerned the numbers are way down in terms of respondents, which is, that's just a statement of fact. Will we hear back later in the future about this advance? Because it's one thing to give the data as it relates to the Barrie survey. How does it compare to our comparatives across the country? So can the board expect a further update that says, here's how Barrie's survey and results compares to other agencies across the country?
Through you, Chair. Yes, that's one of the advantages of the Advantage survey, is that not only will we get the information from our community, but we will also get the detailed information from every other police service that has subscribed, as we have, as well as kind of the high level general information for comparator services, whether they have subscribed or not. These surveys are all conducted in the same methodology at the same time, asking the exact same questions. So it's a more apples to apples comparison than our own survey that we were doing previously, where we had tried to do some comparisons between services, but methodologies were different, time periods were different, questions varied slightly. So it will give us a much better comparison, and we expect to have that information back to the service sometime in August.
Awesome. Anything else on the consent? Those in favor?
In favor.
Thank you. Chief Johnston, your update to the board, please.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to once again share with yourself, the board, and the community some of the ongoings of our organization and its members within the last few weeks here. And we'll jump right into the next slide, recognizing the time constraints too, and appreciating that. On Monday, June 8th, we were proud to welcome 10 new special constables to our service. Special constables are critical to the success of the Barrie Police Service. These 10 will support our organization as courthouse security, platoon bookers, downtown engagement team members, and city guardians. They will work closely with our police officers, police professionals, and a wide range of community members, all with the goal of community safety and well-being. A joint Barrie South Simcoe police investigation has resulted in the largest stolen vehicle recovery in the history of the local services, both South Simcoe and Barrie Police, marking a significant breakthrough in the fight against organized auto theft. As part of a complex and challenging 3-month investigation, working alongside the Canadian Border Service Agency and Equite Association, 40 stolen vehicles were identified and recovered domestically and abroad. Following the referrals from the Barrie Police, CBSA officers were able to identify shipping containers in Montreal and the Greater Toronto area holding 19 stolen vehicles. In addition, the CBSA intelligence were able to identify more shipping containers overseas, resulting in the recovery of 21 stolen vehicles in the ports of Bahamas, Spain, and Ghana as part of Project Starter. On Friday, April 24th, 2026, members of the Prevent Auto Theft Unit made an arrest in Brampton, Ontario. In connection with the investigation, a 31-year-old Brampton man is charged with trafficking property obtained by crime and possession of property obtained by crime over $5,000. Barrie Police would also like to extend thanks to the York Regional Police and the RCMP, which work with Equite Association on behalf of the property and casualty insurance industry to repatriate the vehicles to Canada. This investigation is the direct result of a $1.8 million grant awarded to the Barrie Police and South Simcoe Police Service by the Ontario government in May 2024. This grant allowed for the extensive resources necessary, including the addition of a crime analyst who played an instrumental role in this investigation. Notes here. So we did have members attend and garner information at the American Society of Evidence-Based Policing Conference on drone as a first responder, as well as staffing of a police service. Some very informative presentations. We also presented on some of the work that's being done within the Barrie Police Service. May 25th to 27th, members of the senior leadership team underwent a micro research course for the leadership team, as well as members of the Ontario Provincial Police. June 4th, we hosted the association's celebration of a retirement luncheon. June 9th, we kicked off with a lunch and learn, the 30 Forward initiative that is internationally, nationally, we are driving a driving force, but within our organization, we kicked it off. Same day, June 9th, we have the deputy there at the Sirens for Life kickoff. June 13th and 14th, we obviously hosted the wonderful air show. Weather is a bit challenging, but nonetheless, a very busy city. And on June 16th, we had the law enforcement torch run for Special Olympics. And much thanks to the deputy who strapped on the running shoes. I did not this year. The deputy did and did the run. So appreciative of that. Couple of meetings and partnerships. We did attend, myself and the deputy, down to Niagara Falls for the OACP, Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police annual conference, where the Inspector General attended and had a discussion on both budgets as well as measurement of police service performance. Our organization met with the Georgian Mall recently, management, with respect to addressing crime there and taking a different approach and a far more proactive approach. They were very receptive, and I look forward to bringing back to the board some of the projects that we're doing. 2027, we have our budget. We've had numerous budget review meetings so far, but we will continue to do so as we shape the coming year. And this evening, we have the community budget input from members of the public at the Peggy Hill Center. June 10th, 2026 marks 3 years since 26-year-old Autumn Shaganash was last seen on June 10th, 2023. Autumn disappeared seemingly without a trace. Since that day, her family and friends have had to endure the past 3 years without knowing what happened, where she is, or whether she's okay. That uncertainty is a pain no family should have to endure. Barrie Police are appealing once again for information and asking the public to take another look at the case. In December 2025, the reward authorized by the Barrie Police Service Board for information leading to answers in Autumn's disappearance was increased to up to $100,000. Once again, a digital billboard campaign featuring Autumn launched this week and will run throughout the month of June to help raise awareness. The campaign, made possible through the generous support of Pattison Outdoor Advertising, can be seen at various locations across the city. And finally, Chair, just some investigative updates. On Tuesday, May 19th, emergency crews attended the area of Johnson Street and Shanty Bay following a report of a gunshot. A 22-year-old man was transported to a local hospital with serious injuries and then airlifted to Toronto Area Trauma Center. He is currently listed in stable condition. Barrie Police understand that any incident involving a firearm is very concerning. We share those concerns and remain focused on keeping our community safe. While this isn't believed to be a random act, any form of violence will not be tolerated in this city. On May 29th, police were called for a report of an injured male lying on the ground in the area of Bayfield Street at Dunlop Street West, known as the 5 Points. When police arrived, it was determined that the victim had suffered a stab wound. The 36-year-old Barrie man was rushed to a local hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. Investigators utilized CCTV cameras in the city's downtown as part of their the investigation. And shortly after 2 p.m. that same day, a 29-year-old man was arrested in the area of Toronto Street and Dunlop Street West. He is charged with second-degree murder, assault with a weapon, and possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose. And lastly, police were called to Barrie Park on Friday, June 5th, 2026, after human remains were discovered. It was determined that the remains belonged to a 50-year-old Barrie man. The death is considered suspicious and being investigated as a homicide. Investigators with the Barrie Police Major Crime Unit are appealing to the public for any information on the victim's last known movements, contacts, or activities in recent months, as the investigation remains ongoing. With that, Chair, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Chief Johnson. Questions from the members? Again, thanks for your update, Chief. That concludes our open agenda items. Motion to move in camera in accordance to section 44(1)(b)(d) of the Community Safety and Policing Act. Mr. Khan, seconder.
So moved.
Thank you, Mayor Thompson. Those in favor? Thank you. So I say that concludes our meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for September 22nd, 2026. Thank you, everyone, for attending. The